One of the problems of modern society is we believe that love is a feeling, which of course it is. There's a feeling of love. But actually, the truth is that love is an action. It's what you do. In fact, it's a series of actions, is love. Now, this is the magic. There is a payoff to the act of love. And that's if you keep practicing the action of love, the feeling of love will remain. It will generate, and it will deepen, and it will grow.
Hello and welcome back to the Spiritual Psychology of Acting podcast. This week's episode is all about love. One of the most studied topics, yet somehow the least understood. It exists in all cultures around the world and is the subject of countless movies, novels, pieces of music and artwork throughout all of human history. The pursuit of love for most is a means of ultimate happiness and meaning in life, but it can often result in jealousy, attachment, and a whole host of negative, painful emotions. In this episode, we discuss the key elements in truly understanding real love. We also cover the important role of love in the actor's life, whether it's in self-care and maintaining good mental health, or in the tricky skill of creating believable, romantic relationships on stage and screen. So, without further ado, let's jump into the conversation. So this episode is all about love, and we'll eventually get to the actor and love, why that relationship is important. But I guess a good starting off point would be, since this is the spiritual psychology of acting, what exactly love is from a spiritual perspective. So what exactly is love, John?
Oh, you put me on the spot there. That's a huge question. What is love? Love is the inspiration of the poets and philosophers. Love, what is love? Well, from a spiritual perspective, I'll do my best to answer that, is, as far as I've understood it anyway, that the universe itself, you could say, is an act of love. It's a manifestation of love, and that love runs throughout the whole of the universe. It's in every particle of it, you could say. And the best way to go about understanding sort of the different types of love, in the Vedic tradition, in the Himalayan tradition, we see love. There's three different loves. I know that, like in the Western philosophical tradition, you've got all these other types of love. But in the Vedic tradition, the best inroad, I think, for this, for understanding how it relates to an actor, is, do you remember we talked when we were doing the meditation episode a couple of weeks ago? We looked at the three guna,
Yes.
or the three qualities.
That's right. Yeah.
Guna, Guna, guna. It's a Sanskrit word, and it means really the qualities. And just to give a brief description, they're seen as being the three basic constituents of the creation. So in the same way as you get three primary colors, and from those three primary colors you get all other colors, from the three guna the whole universe is formed. These would be like the children of Mother Nature, as it were, the three guna. And these are known as sattva, rajas, and tamas. Sattva, if you remember, that's where we get our word satisfaction from sat. It means, in Sanskrit, it means truth or being. And sattva, well, I suppose the easiest way to look at it is how, when it affects your own being, that all three are always present in your own being. But when one of them predominates, so for example, when sattva predominates, the mind feels clear and bright. The heart is sort of open and responsive and magnanimous, and the body feels light and supple. And sattva is the light, really. It's what conducts the light. It conducts consciousness, is its function, is the sattva, when that's in predomination. Rajas is activity. So all energy in the universe could be called rajas. In fact, you could say the universe is an act of rajas. What was the Big Bang if it's not a massive outpouring of energy? And that, again, that energy runs right through the universe and is what's sustaining the universe. When rajas in your being is in predominance, then the mind feels very goal-driven, There's a rush, a speed to things, that you're having a million thoughts a minute. Your heart might be very ambitious, or on the opposite, it could be very jealous. And there's often in the body, there's a feeling of agitation. When people are like moving their feet and they can't stop tapping, or they can't stop doing something, there's this feeling of agitation. And that would be the rajas, where we get our English word rage, comes from the Sanskrit rajas. And then the third is the tamas, which is the heavy stuff. That's the grossest part. And the tamas is what binds everything together. So the tamas is, and when it affects, it's in your system. When there's a predominance of tamas, you feel very lethargic. The mind feels very tired, very dull. The heart is sort of closed off, whatever, can't be bothered kind of situation. The body just feels tired and you just want to go to bed. And these three are always present and they're always changing. And if you look at love, that really love is the substance. It's the real substance that's there. You could say everything really is a manifestation of love. Even hatred, in a way, is a manifestation of love, because you have to love something before you can hate something in its opposition.
Yeah.
And if you take like the substance of water, so let's use the analogy that water is love. The water can have different forms. It can either be a gas, steam. It could be a liquid, water, how in its normal temperature, or it could be a solid in the form of ice. And this would be, if love, first of all, the steam form, that would be love in its sattvic form. So sattva is purity. And sattvic form of love in Sanskrit is called prema. And prema is universal love. So the person who has prema in their heart loves all. They may not like the forms or the behaviors, but they love the essential being that's behind it. And in the Vedic teaching, there's only one being manifesting itself as all of us, and the essential self of all is the same consciousness. So in sattva, there's this universal love. That would be the universal love, which we'll come back to in a moment, and why that's important in an actor to cultivate that. If you go to the other end and you get love in the form of ice, that would be the tamasic form of love. And I suppose that would be delusion, infatuation, obsession, mainly delusion. In Sanskrit, it's called moha. And it really means, you could translate it as delusional. And even, as I said, hatred, it would be love in its tamasic form. And that's, the dark end of love. And then somewhere in between, you get water as liquid. And that would be the rajasic form of love, which is really attachment. So the clinging, the holding, the grasping, that comes in the rajasic form. And essentially, why I think this is important and useful in acting is because great acting is really an act of love. An actor that does the work for the love, and we talked about service, didn't we?
Yeah.
As an act of love and service towards the audience, mm-hmm. which is all ultimately, towards the universal self, because who are the audience? They are the universal self, even if they don't know it themselves. That's who they essentially are. And so the love and care that you put into the creation of the character is done as an act of love and service towards the audience, and therefore towards the universe. And that's what creates the best acting, and it keeps the ego at bay. That the rajasic form is the attachment. The actor in that form, they're thinking about, what does the audience think about me? Do they love me? How will my reviews go? How am I competing with the other actors, etc.? And if the actor was under the form of moha, than the Tamasic form of love. And then they wouldn't be, they couldn't really be bothered to do it. They're just doing it out of duty or just to get the paycheck. And then, but of course, this would make an enormous difference. And so for an actor to cultivate sattva, which we talked about in the meditation one, which comes from a meditation and through giving attention to what's in front of you in life and flowing with the events of life, it cultivates this lovely magical sattva that conducts everything. Then the prema, as it were, the universal love in the actor's heart begins to grow. And this is what gives actors their loveliness. I was thinking about this morning, and I was thinking about one actor that I really always love to watch. He's not with us anymore. Is Richard Briers, the English actor Richard Briers, that it was in The Good Life, and there was, and I remember watching him from a very early age. During the 70s, that was on the TV, and it was a really popular. The Good Life was really popular Sunday night entertainment. And he just had this kind of loveliness about him. Felicity Kendall as well, she had it as well. But I was really struck with Richard Briers having this. And then when you hear like Felicity Kendall talking about Richard Briers, which I did, he was on Clive Anderson talking about that recently. And she was just saying what a lovely human being he was. And that's that sense of humanity. We talk about a great actor has this sense of humanity. And what is that? That's really the prema. That's the universal love shining through the heart of the actor. And the beautiful thing is that when that's manifest in the actor and they're lit up with that, as it were, and it kind of comes out of every pore, and we could see that as being gold. That gold that's in the actor's heart is also, of course, in the audience's heart, because it's their humanity as well. And that's brought out of the audience. So the whole place sort of gets warmed up with this love, but it really comes, really from the actor's heart.
Yeah.
I don't even remember, we do exercises, we do a sort of standing preparation where one of the parts of the standing preparation before we go and do some practical acting very often is imagining that there's a sun in the center of the heart, in the center of the chest, like a sun protruding, about the size of a tennis ball, protruding from the heart. And as you breathe in, it begins to get brighter. And as you breathe out, it begins to send golden rays of light in every direction. And what happens is when you give an actor an exercise like that, it just kills all fear and it puts them in that state of love, and then they can act freely. There's a lovely Sanskrit word, lila, and lila translates as the play or the dance. And you could say that really the universe is in a spirit of lila. It's the play of the absolute. It's the play of consciousness, and it is a play. It is a dance. I remember hearing once that it was a conference, East meets West, and it took place I think in the 1960s at St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York. And you had on one side, all the sort of Christian priests and the rabbis, and that side of the spiritual, and then on the other side you had these Shinto priests from the Zen tradition from Japan. And the first question of the conference was from the Western side. They asked them, "What is your theology?" And the Lama sort of smiled, and then he turned around and he conferred with the other Zen monks there. And they were all sort of smiling and laughing, having this conversation. They're like, so that's their question. All right, so the first question is, what's our theology? Right, how are we going to answer this? Right, so how can we express, what is our theology? And the answer that the Lama gave was this. He said, we have no theology, we dance. And
Yeah.
that's pure Zen, that's pure. It's not the theology, it's not all up here in the head. It's
Mhm.
that they understood that at the end of the day, life is a play, life is a dance, and it's there to be played and danced nicely. And if you really understood, the meaning of life, you would understand that it is, in fact, a dance. It's a play. It's the play of
Mhm.
the absolute.
Yeah.
And as actors, we get to create a play within the play, as it were. And look at the word. We're called, as actors, we're called players. We
Yeah.
It's called a play. Um, and that spirit of play is what makes it really lovely and compelling for the audience to watch, is when it's done in that spirit of play. I mean, I
Yeah.
often say to the actors that, can you remember when you were a child and you were playing in your backyard with, I don't know, action men or dollies or toy motor cars or just mud.
A stick.
Yeah, a stick. Yeah,
A tire.
and a tires. But can you remember those moments? Was the purpose of doing that to win an Oscar? Was the purpose of doing that to be discovered by an agent or a casting director? Was the purpose of doing that to be the best player in the game? To be the best actor on the stage, kind of thing. And they laugh and they say, "Well, no, that wasn't." And I say, "Well, so what was your purpose for doing it?" And they realize that it was just done for the love of the play. And then I
Mm.
say, okay, go back to those memories and make that a point of reference. Because if, as an actor, you enter into the work with that same purpose you had as a child when you were playing with toys in your back garden on your own, then that's just pure love and enjoyment. And that's
Mhm.
how you're going to be free and you're going to get the best acting.
Yeah. Well, that's funny when you mention that, actually, that I think you can't underestimate the importance of Leela and play in an actor's work. For Christmas, my parents gave me a hard drive of lots of home videos that my dad had transferred from VHS cassette to digital. And it was just a hard drive full of all my memories, basically from a toddler to 5-year old, 10-year old, up to present. And it was amazing watching it because I decided to be an actor when I was 18 years old. But watching myself as like a 3-year old and a 5-year old, the actor was there. Like, it was obvious I was going to be an actor because it was just, there was pure play and enjoyment. And, and I grew up in a very loving household. My parents and my two older sisters, they did adore me and loved me, and they often talk about how much fun I was as a kid. And it was there to see. There was no self-consciousness. There was no overthinking, of course, because I was a kid and I was just enjoying having a loving audience. It's funny when you get, a bit older, 9 or 10, when I was in my first school play at primary school, you can start to see the self-consciousness kick in. You can start to see there's fear there and there's tension, there's worry about what the audience is going to think of me. And especially when I got into my teens, when I was at high school, I became a very different person. I was very introverted and shy and really kind of closed off. The same level of love and play wasn't there. And it took me a long time to get to that. Even as an actor, a lot of roadblocks were kind of having to be dismantled along the way because I did essentially, looking back on it now, I kind of, not only did I not love myself, I didn't really like myself. And I kind of found myself boring and I didn't have anything to say. And that definitely transferred into my work, that I was, one of the joys of acting was I was able to play any character I felt. So I'll play somebody that's completely different from me and I'll transform and I'll, and then people will love that and you'll see how amazing and talented I am and all that kind of stuff. And it was completely forgetting that I thought I was running away from my negative self-images, but I was running away from my true self, really. I was running away from that little kid that just knew how to play and be free. And like you say, that exercise with the imagining the sun, it does give you that sense of freedom again. And there is something quite childlike about it, that it gives you just permission to play. And I think every actor should have that desire to just to play, to have fun. The fact that we've got this incredible imagination that we can tell stories with and bring people into the present, and I definitely don't think you can underestimate the importance of fun and play and that that Leela, as you were saying.
Yeah, it's a kind of serious play. It might be what you might be in a psychological drama or something, but underneath it, it's really the purpose of the actor for it to work properly is that they're doing it in a spirit of love and play. Even if the character is miserable and suffering and caught up in the drama of it,
Yeah.
Underlying that is really it's an act of Leela. And I often ask that, when we do a little assessment of the work, when I give a group practical exercise, and there might be a bank robber getting ready to go on a bank robbery, and we create all the affinities and all the pictures of that, and then they're sawing off their shotgun and they're getting ready to go on that. And I sit down and I ask them a bunch of questions, things like, what was your imagination like? What was your attention like? Were there any physical tensions in the body, etc.? One of the questions I like to ask is, give yourself a mark out of 10 for Leela. How much Leela was there? And they see really then what kills the Leela is the need to be right, or the need to be perfect, or the habitual self-doubt that comes in as an actor. So they're monitoring everything they're doing. Like you were saying, that you became self-conscious at a certain age. I mean, that's natural to a certain degree.
Yeah.
But that self-consciousness is really because you were thinking about what other people thought about you.
Yeah.
And you were questioning your own value and who you were. Obviously, everybody goes through that stage. Some are still going through it, but it's going through that stage makes self-consciousness. And that's the difference between awareness and self-consciousness. Is awareness is really self-consciousness without criticism. And self-consciousness is awareness with criticism.
Yeah.
And what's the critical? It's critical of the self. And that's why it's really important not to criticize, to appraise your work, to find out what was good and what was useful. When did it work? When didn't it work? But the habitual process of criticism and when a director has a critical approach towards the actors and they criticize rather than appraise and see what, so that worked. So what were you doing there? And that worked, but that didn't work so well. So what was going on there? But when you get a director or even indeed a parent that's very critical, that criticism becomes internalized, and then that kills all the spontaneity, which is the last thing you want, because what we want is the spirit of play, which is spontaneous.
Yeah.
So it's getting the criticism out of the way, and that starts really with the actor learning to see the critical processes that go on in their minds, and especially it's easiest first of all to see outwardly directed criticism. So to give up the criticism. When I found this in myself, this sort of critical thinking of others, which is in direct proportion to the level of criticism of yourself. And I thought, I don't want to live like this anymore. I don't want to be going around criticizing any people anymore. So I'd noticed when the mind would start up criticizing someone, I just go, oh, shut up. Just leave them alone. Just leave them alone. Just stop it. Send them love. Send them well-being. And that's the spirit of prema. It wants all to be happy. It wants all to be free of disease and suffering. Not just some or others, because you understand as well that, a lot of the time that the behaviors that are unsavory that people display or unpleasant come from their own hurt, come from their own suffering. So wishing those people harm, it just, it's the harm that's making them behave like that. Hurt people.
Yeah.
And prema works in the absolute opposite direction to that. It's a spirit of love, a spirit of forgiveness, and not just for others, but also directed towards the self. The natural relationship for a human being to have with themselves is one of self-love. And by that, I don't mean sort of narcissistic delusion, delusional self-aggrandizement, this kind of thing. But I mean just a healthy sense of care and love towards oneself. And you could say really that you can't really love another properly until you've learned to love yourself and seen your own value, and that you give yourself space. and you give yourself the things that you need, that you look after the body, you look after your own emotional and psychological and physical health, that you prioritize those things, you set boundaries with other people. These are all sort of aspects of healthy self-love. And I think that's really important for an actor as well, particularly if you're dealing with, as an actor does, is the likelihood you're not going to get every part you go up for. And it's very easy to interpret that as a rejection and of some devaluement, that you're not good enough, you're not worthy enough, you failed, you're a reject. And then the criticism comes in. I think it's really important that actors have some routine of self-care and look at some of the principles. In fact, I did a workshop on this last night. I did a workshop, which wasn't just for actors, it's for anybody. It's called All About Love. And we looked into the spiritual aspect of love. And then we looked into the sort of psychology of love. But then we looked also into self-love and what the principles of self-love. There's a whole sort of list that I sort of compiled of elements of that. And then also, of course, in loving relationships, which is another part in acting, because you have to create, you might be a lover. It might be a love story, and you have to fall in love with somebody, which is an unusual situation in acting. I read in human zoology, the natural process of creating a pair bond, in zoology, it goes from, first of all, a look, and then there's some sort of communication. It's the same as the genre in the beats of a love story in the genre of love story writing are taken directly from human courtship. And then there's some touching, and then there's kissing, and then it goes all the way the stage to up to fornication. But actors are required to do that when there isn't an actual pair bond between the actors themselves. It's the characters are in the pair bond, right? And it's a very unusual situation. Have you ever had experience of that?
So I mean, I've never really had a full-on love scene like you get on a lot of film and TV. I've done plenty of stage plays where there's been love scenes, or have to create a romantic, the illusion of a romantic relationship with this, between the characters. It is an interesting one, because I've heard it plenty of times with other actors who have had really kind of intense love scenes as their characters, that it's your kind of professional duty to be able to, like we've said previous episodes, to switch on the character and switch it off whenever you need to. I think that's a key element to it.
Yeah, but it can easily get muddied. I mean, I did when I was in my 20s, I did a student film as an actor, and I played the main part in this student film. And there was a scene in the film. It was a bedroom scene with a girlfriend, and an actress I'd never met before, and I'd seen, obviously, in the script. I knew that this was coming up day 4. We're going to shoot this scene, and she turned up, and she was a really attractive girl, and I was in a loving, healthy, happy relationship. At home, I'd come from my girlfriend that morning and come to the set, to the location to shoot this scene, and I was like, okay, so how are we going to approach this? And the director put us in a room together, and I said, okay, so let's work out about our relationship. So how do you think we met? And she went, oh, shut up. And she just started kissing me. And I'm there sort of making out with this actress, and it's she was attractive, and there was a bond, and we had to do the thing. And then after the shoot, she wanted to know, did I want to go for a drink with her? And I had to say no, but because you've actually started the pair bonding mechanism. When people kiss in the saliva, there are these chemicals known as semiochemicals, and when they mix together, it makes you aroused, and it creates oxytocin, and it starts creating a bonding process. But the actor has to have the self-discipline. I mean, that's what makes you a professional actor, isn't it? You can think the thoughts of the character, and you can switch it off. You can let it go.
Yeah.
But
Well,
I
I also,
remember when I was pretty shaken up by the whole experience, and I had to
yeah,
go
of
home
course.
and tell my girlfriend, right, this has happened, and somehow I feel like I've betrayed you, though I haven't. I was just working as an actor. I mean, luckily she was cool about it. She understood. She thought it was funny, actually. Like,
Yeah. No, yeah, it is an interesting one, I guess, especially in recent years, we've had the rise of the intimacy coordinator and it becoming a much more kind of heavily analyzed, as I think as it should be. Actors should be able to feel safe, like you would, if you're playing a murderer or if you're a murder victim. You want to make sure the actor is in control and isn't going to actually, get too swept up in the character and kill you, or go too far or hit you, and that, accidents can happen and stuff. But I've heard there's been quite a few actors who have railed against the idea of an intimacy coordinator because it somehow kills the spontaneity or of it. But I mean, essentially, that is the balance of an actor, isn't it? That it's all make believe, and you've got cameras on you. There's 30 to 40 crew members all kind of around you, even in a most intimate sex scene. And it's all artifice, and it's about how we're able to switch on our imagination and not let it overtake and kind of merge the character thoughts with the actor thoughts. I guess that's the distinction, isn't it? That you have to have the character's thoughts and not have your own actor's thoughts intruding. I guess, and that's in the description there of your story there, that there was some confusion, I guess, that maybe you were too good at kissing. I don't know, John. But it was, that yeah, maybe it gave her an idea of, oh, maybe this could be something else afterwards.
well, it's because you have Bond. I mean, we saw that, with Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie. They
Right,
did
yeah.
that, didn't they? They
Yeah.
got together after doing that shoot because they
Mm-hmm.
created that level of intimacy. But in the zoology books, there was the only example Desmond Morris could find of where human beings create that pair bond. It's called, in zoology, it's called the pair bonding mechanism, and
Uh-huh.
it's a series of stages to create a pair bond. It's the
Yeah.
only place where that's done artificially, and he was saying there, so I don't know how actors do it, because
Right.
there's chemistry involved. There's
Yeah.
biochemistry that takes place. But at the end of the
Yeah.
day, the job of a professional actor is to be able to think the character's thoughts at will,
Mm-hmm.
and to be able to discern between the character's thoughts and the actor's thoughts.
And to be able to box that off, right?
Yeah,
To be able to, put that in a box and, that's the character. Or like you said earlier, not taking the character home with them, especially if they're a nasty piece of work. You don't want it to spill over into your personal life.
no, you really don't. You pause at the beginning, you connect with the senses, then you do the
Yeah.
character work, and then at the end you do it, and that sort of contains it in a box.
And the precipitation exercise as well. That's a good way of just letting it just fall away. It empties your mind of all that, all the different purposes and all the craziness of the mind of the character that you were playing.
Yeah, just remind people, if they're not sure what's meant by the precipitation exercise, it's the like a cloud. So you imagine that your
Mm-hmm.
body is a cloud, and then you begin to gently rain and release your own substance. And that's a really nice way to end the rehearsal, just to let the character go. And then, of course, in the next rehearsal, you've got to pick it back up again. But what is the character really? The character is a complex within the mind of the actor. By meaning a complex, it's a group of thoughts. So if you're playing Hamlet, what is Hamlet? It's I, the essential I, the self, consciousness, the witness, plus Hamlet pictures. I mean, what is John? What is Jordan? It's the essential I plus Jordan pictures, meaning the collection, the stored collection of your experiences, your narrative, which is really just a collection of mental pictures. And to do that, you have to compartmentalize the character, that they're just really a set of thoughts within your mind. But you might be, if you're doing rep or something, you might have different characters that you're playing, and they're all like different boxes. And at the beginning of the performance, you open the box, or at the beginning of the rehearsal, and you let those thoughts out again, and you let yourself think those thoughts and feel those feelings.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, we're getting off subject a bit. We were talking about love, weren't we?
Well, no, I think, yeah. Well, to bring it back to what you were saying there in terms of chemistry between actors as well. I've heard equally there's stories of actors who absolutely hated each other, and somehow on screen that translated as pure sexual energy and chemistry and tension, and it becomes this indelible performance of these two characters in love struggling with their feelings. And I think that's probably more to do with the fact of you've got two excellent actors who are able to let go of actors' thoughts. They may not like this person they're opposite, and yet the characters' thoughts themselves are, I'm in love with this person, I don't know what to do with these feelings, and it's being able to differentiate, I guess, yes, but also, like you say, let kind of that sense of play come out and then box it off again when it's necessary.
Yeah, I did. Well, yeah, I hear what you're saying. I directed a play, one of my own plays, Beyond Ecstasy, and one night I went to see the play, and the two actors, it was a love story, and the two main actors, when they kissed at the end, there was like nothing going on between them. It's like, what's going on here? It's like, there was there before I'd seen it. And then I went backstage after the play saying, what's going on? And they'd had a falling out and that they weren't on speaking terms, and they'd had an argument, and it showed on stage. And I was like, look, come on, guys. It's like, this is a love story. If you don't actually love each other, if the characters don't love each other, there's no play, there's no payoff. And so they had to work out their differences, in order to get back on track and for the characters to love each other again. But that's just another example of the actor's own unfinished thinking, or their own baggage, or their own stories.
If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can do so by emailing podcast@spiritualpsychologyofacting.com. If you have any feedback, thoughts, topics you think we should cover in future episodes, or questions about the spiritual psychology of acting, whatever it is, we'd love to hear from you. The email address again is podcast@spiritualpsychologyofacting.com. You can find it in the description of the podcast. Now, back to this week's episode. So we've talked there about love from a spiritual perspective. What about the psychological aspect? Love from a psychological point of view.
Well, if you go to Freud talked about the libido. And people usually, when you talk about libido, they think it means just like the sexual libido. Right, yeah. But really, libido is more general than that. It's the energy to nurture, to care, is an expression of the libido. And psychologically speaking, you have outwardly directed libido. When you love something, they're an object of your libido. So the libido stream, if you think of it as a stream, as an energy, is directed towards that object, whether that's a person or a cat or an organization or your favorite mug, or could be anything. Could be a physical object or a human object, for example. So you have this what's called outwardly directed libido. For example, like when there's a breakup, and then people have a rebound relationship. It's almost what's happened there is that they've had an object of their libido, and the libido is their desire to love something is towards that object, that person in this instance, and then the relationship breaks off, and then it's like, well, what do you do with that libido stream? Well, what do I do with it? Where do I put it? You might find you stroke your cats more, or that you're giving more attention to things. Or then you meet someone else and you're like, oh, right, oh, great. And you project your libido stream onto that person. That's what would be a rebound relationship. So we have this outwardly directed libido, but we also have inwardly directed libido. So that's the libido back towards the self. In its extreme, a degree of inwardly directed libido is natural and healthy, but if it becomes extreme, that becomes vanity, that becomes narcissism, where it's all about you, and you become your own object of your own libido. The other part to the libido, the other aspect that Freud talked about was the mortido, and that's the mort, death. It's the dark side. It's the destructive. It's that is the will to destroy. And actually, where does the mortido arise? The mortido energy arises when the libido stream is blocked. And it's actually the same energy. So if you like, the libido stream, once it meets an obstacle, it turns over and turns into mortido, the desire to attack. And really, it's to destroy the obstacle to the expression of the libido.
Right, yeah.
Do you see what I mean?
Yeah,
It's still, and it's all related to love. It's all really an object of love. But that's why I say that, to hate something, you have to love something first of all. And then if the mortido can't find its outward expression, which we have this term we use in the class, that the character siphons off their mortido, they find, this is passive aggression.
Yeah.
You probably recognize a thing of like denying someone a Facebook like. That you saw their post, but you deny them the like. That's a little, that we call that siphoning off the mortido.
Or Twitter, right? Twitter is it's like a mortido machine, right? It's people go on there to vent and to argue with people over pointless, trivial things that don't really matter, and then end up making them feel worse afterwards. It's the whole premise of Twitter is this game that makes people angry. And you don't really have the same on other social media platforms, but it's especially when you're not got a living person in front of you. You've got all this negative energy you want to direct somewhere. Why not direct it at this faceless person?
Well, at the end of the day, people only give out what they have to give.
Mm.
I'm sure that the person isn't really upset with the post or the tweet that someone put out. They're really upset with something else in their life, that their libido stream has been blocked in another way, and they siphon off their mortido by trolling. Trolling is siphoning off mortido.
Yeah.
It really, and what's it born of? It's born of a blocked libido.
Mm-hmm.
So something they've loved, there's been an estrangement from it, or an inability to express it, or their love hasn't been reciprocated, and then that creates the mortido, and then they find ways to siphon off the mortido.
Like a football fan as well, right? Like a football fan, the love and passion they have for their team, and then they lose, and then the football fan goes and punches a wall, or an opposing fan.
Or an opposing fan, or punches the referee. It's the same thing. That's a really good example. But it's all based on that the football team has become an object of the expression of the libido. Mm. When the team are winning, they're winning. There's an association that's created there. I mean, it's all, at the end of the day, it's just a bunch of people kicking a balloon around a field.
Yeah. Actually, that also reminds me of, you're talking about the Japanese there in that example there of the two sides in that church. The Japanese have a real tradition in theatre, don't they, of training actors to clean and to kind of prepare the stage. And in the same way, the Japanese football team, I don't know if you heard, but in the World Cup, the fans, they would stay behind after every game, regardless of the result, win, lose, or draw. They would stay behind, make sure everything was clean and spotless, left in a better condition. And the players would do the same in the dressing rooms. And in that way, they won the hearts of like nations all around the world. And I don't think it's any coincidence that they actually went a lot further in the tournament than anyone expected.
Well, they were cultivating prema, and that's a very powerful force.
Yeah.
You just have to watch Star Wars to know that love, the force always wins against the dark side of the force. And really, what's the force is the consciousness of the expression of the libido, and the dark side of the force is the mortido that arises.
Yeah.
But there's another aspect to so you have the inwardly and outwardly directed libido, but you also have, as well as the outwardly directed libido, mortido, when the mortido can't find its outward expression, because of social custom or guilt, then what happens is the Mortido stream becomes inwardly directed. So this can be, self-hatred can start with, criticism in the mind. It could go further. It could manifest as self-mutilation, cutting, etc. With the ultimate expression of the self-directed Mortido being suicide.
Mm-hmm.
So going from, having some critical thinking to just suicide is like, it's on a scale. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
And this is interesting in acting, because then you understand that the Mortido actions of the character have always come from a thwarted libido. So to create that truthfully, you have to find out, what did the character love that they were denied of? What's the story? The story of her, of the denial of something, that the estrangement from some sort of love or expression of love. And that's what creates a villain. Do you see what I mean? It's that, but it all starts, and you can see that really it's all love. It's love in a tamasic form, but it's all really love. And that's why it's so important for actors to understand programming purposes, which in the spiritual psychology of acting, we go into a huge amount of detail, and it's the body of the technique. And what's a purpose? It's the expression of libido and Mortido tensions. I mean, what's the, like, for example, the purpose I want to take revenge is I want to make others suffer for the suffering I've been caused, not necessarily for the suffering they caused me, because you might go and take revenge on someone else. Do you see what I mean? But you're getting rid of, you're expressing that Mortido tension. But what's behind the desire to take revenge is some thwarting of the libido. So something they loved, even if it was themselves and they were hurt and they were damaged, then there's a desire to take revenge. So when you, as an actor, when you have a character who wants to take revenge, the first thing you have to do is create their pain. You have to create, what was it they wanted that they didn't get? And that's what really fuels it. And that's what, when you look in the actor's eyes, that when the character wants to take revenge, you can see the pain behind the Mortido. And that's what makes it really come alive. That's what makes it really compelling, when you can actually see the character's pain behind their aggressive actions. It makes it really human, because it's psychologically truthful.
And we all know and experience those emotions as well, don't we? Like you say, nothing human is alien to me. We all know exactly what it's like to feel hurt and to want to do something about it. We all have that in us.
We all have anything. As you've seen on the course, there's some 180 different human purposes, and we all have all of the purposes. Some of them may be asleep and might not be activated yet, or some of them may have been activated and closed down. But we all have the capacity to have all of the purposes. And so to understand them is seeing how these processes work in yourself. Because the character will always be either their actions of the character is an expression of outwardly directed libido, inwardly directed libido, outwardly directed Mortido, or inwardly directed Mortido. That's really it. Or they're just at rest. Do you see what I mean? That's the only escape from it. And that's what makes their tensions. And a lot of it is in acting, it's creating tension and then releasing tension. We have in zoology, and I use this a lot in acting as well, is when you have two birds, say two pigeons, and you put some bread down, and two pigeons both go for the same piece of bread. But in the pigeon world, there's a really distinct hierarchy, right? So there's a whole number of who's on top of who's dominant to who, and it's really detailed. And if someone of a certain hierarchy goes to take the piece of bread, they've got the pigeon's got the picture. There's the bread, and they want the bread in their mouth, and they want it in their gut, and they want to eat it. That's a libido drive. They go to express it. And one of the dominant pigeons goes, no, I want that piece of bread, and takes the piece of bread. And the other one is obliged to retreat and to not take the bread. Now their libido drive is being thwarted. So what do they do with it? Well, you've seen them. They go and walk in a circle and flap their wings. And what they're doing, it's known in zoology as a displacement activity. They're releasing the tension of a purpose meeting an obstacle. Then what do you do with the energy? You scratch, you twitch, you get angry, and in acting, what we're doing is we create tension and then we release the tension. Mm-hmm. It's the same in music, as I DJ, and if you play a record that's in a minor chord and you create tension, like a piece of techno, like a piece of melodic techno that has a degree of tension within it, and then you mix the record into something in a major key. It's basically sad, happy. What I noticed is there's a great relief of tension on the dance floor, and it brings the dance floor up.
Yeah.
So they're like, "Way!" When it comes up, they all put their hands in the air. They all that. But that's part of the art of DJing, is creating and releasing tension. And it's the same in acting. Is you're creating and releasing tension, and understanding a bit about how this works in the form of libido, mortido, and how it works in psychology is really important. But in answer to your question, because I don't feel like I've answered an aspect of it, is that what is love in a psychological sense? The first thing to understand is that one of the problems of modern society is we believe that love is a feeling, which of course it is. There's a feeling of love. But actually the truth is that love is an action. It's what you do. In fact, it's a series of actions is love. And we all know that, people fall in love, which you could say is nature's way of hoodwinking you into copulation, going through that pair bond, the stages of the pair bonding, so that then, none of us would be here if it wasn't for this. And it seems to last generally, the falling in love, because when you fall in love, the ego boundaries come down and the two become one. What do you want to do tonight, darling? I don't mind, darling, as long as I'm with you. And they'll do, they just want to be together because the ego barriers have come down and the two, they become like one together. But then, and there's a lot of chemicals involved in that, dopamine and oxytocin. And then, of course, what happens, and generally, I don't want to sing a sad song here, but it's generally like 6 months to a year, the chemicals begin to reduce. That's what gives the rose tinted glasses. And then you realize, well, this is a human being. This is a person who's flawed. They pick their nose when they watch the television. They piss on the toilet seat. They do these things. And so you're seeing a human being. And we have this myth also of the one. There's the one, and because we've all seen Cinderella, and of course Cinderella gets discovered by her true love, Prince Charming. Of course, there isn't a Cinderella 2 when you see what happens after that, when they have to actually meet as human beings. The people think that love is falling in love, but that's really the prelude to real love. And real love is a choice. It's a set of choices and actions and behaviors. And real love, the best definition I've heard of it in a psychological sense, is from a psychologist, a psychiatrist actually, called M. Scott Peck. He wrote a book called The Road Less Traveled. And in there, he defined the whole middle section. I encourage anyone to read this book. It's absolutely fantastic. The middle section of the book is called love. And he defines love as the will to extend oneself for the purpose of benefiting your own or another's spiritual growth or spiritual development, which is interesting, your own. So this is an act of self-love, which might be challenging yourself or challenging your partner, challenging their addictive behavior or challenging. This can be an act of love. We call it tough love. Yeah. It's an action. Now, real love, the sattvic form of love, what makes it the difference between the prema and the raga, which is the attachment, is that in raga, you want a result. You do it, you want a payback. It's a transaction, right? I bought you the flowers, now give me a kiss. Do you know this kind of situation?
Yeah.
But in prema, the act of love is there's no payoff. You do it for the delight of the beloved. Now, this is the magic. There is a payoff to the act of love. And that's if you keep practicing the action of love, the feeling of love will remain. It will generate, and it will deepen, and it will grow. So it's really important to understand from a psychological point of view to get over the idea that love is a feeling, because that way lies disappointment and heartache. And, after 6 months, you think, hold on, maybe you're not the one anymore. So I need to get out of this relationship because the one must be somewhere else. And they're fixated on the one, and they go from, one to another for the rest of their lives and never experience a deeper sense of love. And this is what you see in sort of healthy long-term relationships, is that they've understood this. They've understood how to resolve conflict, how to support each other, how to give each other space, how to care for each other, how to forgive each other. These are all acts of real love. And that's where you create a real depth of love. I mean, I'm talking about, this could be friendship, but I'm talking particularly, in relationships that start out as, as romantic relationships. And why does the love run out? It's a natural process. The oxytocin runs its course, and it starts to dwindle. And that's where, I start to wander. But love as well is a discipline. If you want to maintain and deepen the sense of love, there's a psychological discipline to it.
Well, that's interesting, because I think if you take like the Beatles as well, it makes me think of, if you take their whole overarching theme, like with all their work, you would say it's love, right? That's kind of a common kind of theme throughout their work. If you start at the very beginning of in the 60s, then it's like it's all raga, and it's attachment. It's I want to hold your hand, and I love you and adore you. It's all that kind of stuff. And then it kind of progresses as they progress and mature, and it gets a lot of, obviously, more spiritual and philosophical, until they get to the very end. All you need is love. And then what's kind of regarded as their very last song is the end, in which the last lyric is, and in the end, the love you take is equal to the love you make. And it's like almost like coming to that natural realization that that's what love truly is.
Yes. Yeah, that reminds me of the end of The Wizard of Oz, when the so-called wizard, he's handing out the gifts, and he gives the Tin Man a ticking heart. It's a clock. It's shaped as a heart. He says that at the end of the day, it's not important. The measure of a person's heart isn't how much they love, it's how much they are loved. And I remember thinking about that and thinking, hold on, surely he's got that the wrong way round. Surely a measure of a person's heart is how much they love rather than how much they are loved. But actually, the measure of how loved you are is in proportion to how much you love. So to know that you're really loving properly, it means that others will love you. And it's exactly the same as what the Beatles are saying there, that it's equiproportionate. So if you want to increase the feeling of love and maintain the feeling of love, which, as we've discussed, is really important in an actor, it's what gave Richard Briers his loveliness, that his humanity, that real quality. In a technical sense, in a spiritual sense, it's cultivating the prema. And, it's the spiritual work of meditation, but it's also the psychological work of choosing not to criticize oneself and others, because that's equiproportionate as well. The more you criticize, someone who criticizes others is definitely criticizing themselves. The person who beats outwardly at you is beating inwardly at themselves. Adler said that those who want others to suffer do so because their own suffering hasn't been resolved. And at the end of the day, people can only give out what they've got to give. And if all they had was love in their heart, all they could give out is love. But if all they had was criticism, all they can give out is criticism, you know?
Yeah.
So it's each of our duties, not just as actors, but as human beings, to, especially in a time where there's so much of the opposite. There's so much of the moha, you know, that the world is being led by delusional narcissists, rather than poets and philosophers.
Yeah.
You know, there needs to be a love revolution or a
Yeah.
love evolution. To move in terms of the chakras, it's to move from the energies of the solar plexus chakra, which is all about the will to power and dominance, and the chakra below that, which is all about having pleasure on tap and my pleasure, to moving it to the level of the heart. The general level of consciousness of the human race is somewhere between the navel to the solar plexus chakra. And that's why we see the situations we've got today, the wars and the squabbling and the misunderstanding. But if sufficient numbers of people can raise the level of consciousness to the level of the heart chakra, then we will see a renaissance in spiritual culture, in human culture, and people will remember their humanity. And it's a lot more difficult to go and fight a war if you understand that the person that you're fighting is actually your own self in another form. And that's the secret of human relationships, is to remember that everybody you meet is just yourself in another form. And that's love.
Yeah. Well, it's very interesting there, the whole idea of, you know, everyone's duty to raise a level of consciousness and to experience that love, and it's contagious, right? If you get that balance right. When you talked about Richard Briers, actually, it reminded me of another actor more recently, Cynthia Erivo. I don't know if you know her. She
she's great.
Yeah, she did a lot of musicals and is now really making her way in film and TV. But I kind of get a sense from her that all her performances are they're just so full of that prema, that universal love. And actually, when I've seen her on talk shows and chat shows, it's the same thing there. Just is such a lovely person. You just get a sense of her humanity just oozing out of the screen, and it does infect you as well. It makes you just feel so much better. It raises your own level of consciousness to see somebody so full of love in their own life. And what's interesting, I guess, you know, Richard Briers is known for quite kind of nice TV programs. Or Cynthia Erivo, she's, you know, played a lot of darker characters, and yet still there's that sense of real humanity. Every single character, even if it's a dark, gritty thriller or a horror, you know, there's that character is made with love, and just it comes out the screen, and you can't help but feel that and be kind of buoyed by that, you know. But I guess that's a good thing to talk about as well, is that we'll eventually get on to next week. We will be discussing villains and how to play villains. We've mentioned it a little bit earlier there, but that's quite a good little segue into next week's. Maybe we should save some of that for next episode.
Yeah, well, next week we're going to we'll look at more the dark side.
Yeah,
is playing the sort of villains and subject of evil, and what we do with that in the arts, and how that manifests in acting and in the characters, and how to create that convincingly.
You've been listening to the Spiritual Psychology of Acting podcast. Thank you again for listening all the way to the very end of the episode. Please join us again next week as we delve into the dark side of human nature in playing villains. But until then, have a great week, and we'll see you again next time.